The businessman who shouted at his worker and got a lesson he never expected, my friends. Tonight I want to share with you not just a story, but a mirror of who we are and who we can be. There was once a businessman, a man of wealth, prestige, and power, who lost his patience one day. In a crowded workplace, he shouted at his worker, humiliating him in front of others. At that moment, the businessman believed his authority gave him the right to strip another of dignity. But what he did not expect was the lesson that came quietly, powerfully, and without a single word of anger in return. Because that worker, though humble in position, stood tall in character. He did his job with integrity. He showed up the next morning not with bitterness, but with commitment. And in his silence, in his perseverance, he revealed a truth that no wealth can buy. Respect is not earned by titles, it is earned by how we treat one another. My fellow dreamers, isn't this the story of life? Too often, we see arrogance rise and humility pushed aside. But history tells us, time and again, that true greatness belongs not to those who shout the loudest, but to those who endure, who build, who believe in tomorrow even when they are overlooked today. Think of the single mother working 2 jobs to provide for her children. Think of the teacher who stays after class to help the struggling student. Think of the worker who, despite being disrespected, keeps showing up with pride because he knows his worth is not defined by another's opinion. These are ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and they are the heartbeat of every thriving society. The lesson of that businessman and his worker is not just about one encounter. It is about us. Each of us will face moments of frustration, of disappointment, even of disrespect. And in those moments, we have a choice to mirror anger or to rise above it, to shrink or to stand, to tear down or to build. And let us remember this: change does not come from the powerful alone. Change is built from the ground up, in the hands of workers, in the hearts of families, in the voices of communities that refuse to be silenced. So I say to you tonight, whatever your role, whatever your struggle, do not let anyone convince you that your voice does not matter. Do not allow the shouts of arrogance to drown out the quiet strength of your character. Persevere, keep faith, and know that the measure of your life will not be the titles you carry, but the lives you touch along the way. Yes, the businessman shouted. But in the end, it was the worker who gave the world a lesson it will never forget: that dignity is stronger than power, that perseverance outlasts pride, and that respect is the true wealth of humanity. So let us walk forward together, not as the powerful and the powerless, not as the bosses and the workers, but as one people, bound by respect, by hope, and by an unshakable belief in one another. Because the future we dream of will not be built on shouting. It will be built on listening. It will not be built on arrogance. It will be built on humility. And it will not be built by one man. It will be built by all of us. Stand tall, work hard, believe deeply, and above all, never forget this truth: no matter where you are, no matter what you face, you carry within you the power to change the story. There is a difference between having authority and having respect. Authority can be granted by position, by title, or by power. Respect, however, is earned through actions, through character, and through the way we treat other human beings. The story of the businessman who shouted at his worker is a living reminder that authority without respect is fragile, temporary, and hollow. Imagine the scene: a man in a suit, wealthy, standing in his office, raising his voice to a worker who earns less than a fraction of his income. His authority is visible. He has the resources, the company, the control. But in that moment, his words strip away something far more important. He may command obedience, but he does not command loyalty. He may enforce rules, but he cannot enforce respect. And as he shouts, something remarkable happens. The worker, standing quietly, not shouting back, not lowering himself to the same level, reveals a truth greater than any contract or command: that respect is greater than authority. Respect does not demand noise. It does not boast. It does not force its way. Respect is subtle, but it carries weight. When you respect others, even those who hold less power than you create bonds that authority alone cannot build. Think about the greatest leaders of history. They were not remembered for how loud they shouted, but for how deeply they respected the people they led. Nelson Mandela, for example, held the authority of a president, but his power came not from the title. It came from the respect he had earned through suffering, patience, and an unwavering commitment to his people. Now compare that with the businessman in our story. His authority was undeniable, but his behavior eroded the very respect that should have made his authority meaningful. Authority without respect breeds fear, resentment, and silence. But respect, even without authority, breeds trust, loyalty, and unity. When a worker respects a leader, he will give more than the minimum. He will give his heart, his effort, his creativity. But when a worker is disrespected, he may still work, but his spirit is already gone, and no authority can command the soul. This is why respect is greater than authority. Authority is a position. It sits above you on an organizational chart. Respect is a decision. It sits within you as a reflection of your values. One can be taken away in an instant, but the other remains etched in memory long after the titles fade. Let us think about our own lives. How often do we seek to assert authority rather than build respect? How often do we want to prove we are in charge rather than prove we care? Authority can close a deal, but respect opens doors that authority never could. Authority can demand silence, but respect inspires voices. Authority can force compliance, but respect builds a movement. The businessman learned too late that shouting only created fear in the room, while the worker's quiet perseverance created something far stronger: admiration. Every person watching, every worker standing nearby, saw the contrast. They saw authority used to humiliate and dignity used to endure. And in their hearts, they knew who truly stood taller. The lesson is clear. Authority may put you on a pedestal, but respect is what keeps you there. Respect flows from empathy. It comes from seeing people not as tools, not as employees, not as positions on a chart, but as human beings with families, struggles, and dreams. When a leader remembers this, his authority becomes powerful because it is supported by respect. But when he forgets, his authority weakens because it is built on fear rather than trust. The truth is, people will forget the titles you held, but they will never forget how you treated them. A CEO, a president, a boss. These titles fade when the role ends. But if you treated people with respect, they will carry that memory long after the position is gone. And if you treat people with disrespect, they will carry that too. That is why respect outlives authority. Every one of us, whether we lead a team, a family, or simply ourselves, faces the same choice: do we lean on authority or do we lead through respect? Do we shout or do we listen? Do we demand or do we inspire? Authority is given, but respect must be chosen every single day. And it is in that choice where greatness is found. There is something timeless about the power of character. Wealth can buy influence, it can buy comfort, it can buy attention, but it can never buy the respect that flows from a life lived with integrity. The businessman in our story stood tall in financial strength, but in the moment he chose to disrespect his worker, he revealed a weakness no amount of money could hide. His riches could not shield him from the truth. That character outshines wealth every single time. Consider what it means to be wealthy. In society's eyes, wealth means abundance, the ability to have what others cannot, the capacity to move mountains with financial resources. But wealth is only a resource. It is neutral. What defines its impact is the character of the person who holds it. In the wrong hands, wealth becomes arrogance. In the right hands, it becomes generosity. And when you strip it all away, when money loses its shine and titles lose their meaning, what remains is character, and that is what people truly remember. Think about the worker. He had no fortune, no company, no title attached to his name. Yet when the businessman shouted at him, When wealth and power tried to humiliate him, the worker's response was not anger, but quiet strength. He did not let bitterness define him. He did not let arrogance provoke him. His character spoke louder than his circumstances. In that moment, every eye in the room could see the difference. The businessman had wealth, but the worker had something far greater: dignity. This is the paradox of life. Money can buy a beautiful house, but it cannot create a home. Money can purchase luxury, but it cannot purchase loyalty. Money can attract a crowd, but it cannot guarantee respect. It is character, the unseen force, the compass within, that gives meaning to all else. Without character, wealth is empty. With character, even a modest life shines with richness that cannot be measured. Let us reflect on history. Time and again, we see examples of wealthy figures whose names are forgotten because they built nothing lasting with their riches. Yet we also see men and women of character, teachers, laborers, activists, dreamers, whose influence outlived their material possessions. Mahatma Gandhi wore simple clothing, lived simply, yet his character shook an empire. Mother Teresa held no wealth, but her compassion became a global treasure. Their stories teach us that character leaves footprints deeper than wealth ever could. Now, bring it closer to the everyday. We all know someone in our communities who does not have much, yet commands respect wherever they go. It may be the elder who greets every neighbor with kindness, the nurse who sacrifices sleep to care for others, or the parent who works quietly to give their children a better life. These people do not stand out because of wealth. They stand out because of character. Their influence cannot be measured in dollars, but in lives touched, in hearts moved, in trust earned. The businessman believed his shouting displayed strength, but in truth, it revealed the weakness of his character. His money allowed him to raise his voice without fear of consequence, but his lack of respect stripped him of the admiration that wealth can never buy. Meanwhile, the worker, standing with quiet dignity, showed that true worth is not in what you own, but in who you are. And here lies the lesson for each of us. Every day, we are tempted to believe that success is measured by numbers in a bank account, by cars in a driveway, by the clothes we wear. But what happens when those fade? What happens when markets fall, when fortunes vanish, when time itself strips away material possessions? The only thing that endures is character. It is a character that holds you steady when storms come. It is a character that keeps your name alive in the memories of others. It is a character that transforms ordinary people into extraordinary examples of resilience and courage. Wealth may open doors, but character decides what happens once you step inside. Wealth may bring recognition, but character ensures that recognition turns into respect. Wealth may impress for a season, but character inspires for generations. The worker's strength was not in his paycheck. It was in his principles. The businessman's weakness was not in his wealth. It was in his pride. And so we see clearly when the two stood side by side, the light of character outshone the glitter of wealth, proving that the true measure of greatness is not in what you hold in your hands, but in what you carry in your heart. There is a profound kind of strength that is often overlooked. The strength of silence. In a world where shouting, reacting, and defending oneself feels natural, silence can seem like weakness. Yet, as the story of the businessman and the worker shows us, silence can echo louder than any angry response. When the businessman raised his voice in arrogance, the worker chose restraint. He did not retaliate, he did not mirror the disrespect, and he did not allow the moment to pull him into bitterness. Instead, he allowed silence to speak for him, and in doing so, he delivered a lesson far more powerful than words ever could. Silence does not mean passivity. It does not mean surrender. Silence, when chosen with purpose, becomes a language of dignity. It is a declaration that says, "Your words cannot define me. Your anger cannot control me. My worth is not diminished by your voice." This is what the worker demonstrated. While the businessman believed his shouting proved authority, It was the worker's composure that truly displayed strength. Think about the dynamics of anger. Anger often grows louder because it seeks validation. The one who shouts wants to provoke, to draw out a reaction, to prove dominance. But when anger is met with silence, the cycle breaks. The fire has no fuel. The shouter becomes exposed, their power reduced, their arrogance revealed. This is what makes silence so profound. It turns the spotlight from the victim to the aggressor, showing the world where the true weakness lies. Consider the way silence has shaped history. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke powerful words, but just as powerful was the silence of peaceful protesters who faced violence without raising their hands in retaliation. Gandhi mobilized millions not by shouting back, but by quiet resistance, by refusing to answer oppression with violence. Their silence did not signal fear, it signaled unshakable conviction. And in that conviction, entire systems of injustice began to crumble. In everyday life, too, silence can transform moments of conflict. Think of a heated argument where one person refuses to escalate. Their calmness unsettles the aggressor. Their refusal to match hostility exposes the futility of anger. This is why the worker's silence in the face of his boss's shouting left such a mark. He reminded everyone present that self-control is more commanding than raised voices, and that dignity does not require noise. Silence also teaches us about perspective. When we respond in anger, our words often outpace our wisdom. We say things we cannot take back. But silence gives space. For thought, for restraint, for clarity. In that pause, strength grows. The worker chose silence, not because he lacked words, but because he understood their value. His quietness became a mirror, forcing the businessman to see himself reflected in his own outburst. There is another lesson here. Silence is not about what others hear, but about what it builds within us. It teaches patience. It strengthens resilience. It reminds us that we are not defined by the disrespect of others, but by the respect we hold for ourselves. When the worker remained silent, he refused to let the businessman's anger penetrate his sense of worth. His silence said, "You may shout, but you cannot shake me. You may belittle me, but you cannot break me." That is the unspoken power of silence. And yet, silence is not always easy. It requires discipline to hold your tongue when provoked. It requires courage to stand tall without striking back. It requires faith in the truth that dignity is stronger than noise. But when you master that discipline, you discover a freedom far greater than the temporary satisfaction of an angry reply. You discover the freedom of knowing that your peace cannot be stolen by another's rage. The worker's silence is not a story of submission, but of victory. His choice revealed a truth that authority could not silence, that the quiet strength of self-control outlasts the fleeting power of anger. The businessman's shouting lasted only moments, but the worker's silence lingered in the memory of all who witnessed it. Long after the noise faded, the dignity of the worker remained, reminding us all that sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that chooses not to speak. Humility is often misunderstood in a world that celebrates loud success, bold ambition, and visible power. Many believe humility means shrinking, hiding, or making oneself small. But in truth, humility is not weakness. It is strength under control, greatness wrapped in grace, and influence without arrogance. The story of the businessman and the worker shows this clearly. The businessman, clothed in wealth and authority, raised his voice in anger, hoping to remind everyone of his status. But the worker, with nothing but humility, reminded everyone of what true greatness looks like. Humility elevates humanity because it allows us to see people not as stepping stones, but as fellow travelers on the journey of life. When the worker chose not to fight arrogance with arrogance, he reflected humility's quiet power. He did not need to prove his worth by shouting back. He did not need to tear his boss down to stand tall. Instead, by staying grounded, he showed that humility is not about thinking less of yourself, but about thinking of others without losing yourself. That is where its strength lies. Think of leaders who are remembered with love, not just respect. They are not remembered for the number of commands they gave, but for the compassion with which they led. A humble leader understands that authority is not a crown to be worn, but a responsibility to serve. They know that greatness is not measured in how high you stand, but in how many people you lift up along the way. The worker, by embodying humility, lifted himself above the anger that tried to pull him down, and in doing so, he lifted the entire room's perspective on what dignity truly means. Humility also has a way of disarming pride. The businessman's shouting may have seemed powerful in the moment, but arrogance always has cracks. Pride shouts loudly because it is insecure. It demands recognition because it is afraid of being overlooked. But humility stands quietly because it is secure. It does not need applause to confirm its value. It does not need to crush others to feel strong. This is why humility often outshines arrogance. It does not compete, it simply radiates. We see this in everyday life. A teacher who treats every student with patience, even when they struggle, is showing humility. A manager who listens before speaking, who values the opinions of their team, is showing humility. A parent who sacrifices quietly for their children without demanding credit is showing humility. These people may not receive fame or fortune, but they elevate humanity in ways wealth cannot measure. Their humility plants seeds of respect, trust, and love that grow far beyond their immediate actions. The worker's humility in the face of disrespect was not about silence alone, it was about perspective. He knew that shouting back would only create more division, more humiliation, more pain. By standing with humility, he reminded the businessman and everyone watching that real power does not come from tearing others down. It comes from lifting yourself above the noise, from refusing to let pride control your actions, from valuing humanity over ego. Humility also builds connection. People are drawn to those who carry humility because it makes them feel seen, valued, and respected. No one is inspired by arrogance. No one follows a leader out of genuine love when that leader looks down on them. But humility invites loyalty. It says, I may have more, but I am not more. I may lead, but I walk with you, not ahead of you. This is what elevates humanity, the recognition that we rise together, not alone. The businessman's arrogance left him isolated, for respect cannot live where pride rules. But the worker's humility left him admired, for people are always moved by grace in the face of adversity. His quiet strength reminded everyone that humility is not about surrendering your dignity. It is about protecting it. It is about choosing to rise above conflict without losing compassion. To be humble is to remember that every person has worth, regardless of title or status. It is to remember that leadership is not about privilege, but about service. It is to recognize that life is not a competition for who can shout the loudest, but a journey where those who bow low enough to lift others will always rise higher. Humility elevates humanity because it takes us beyond ourselves, beyond ego, and beyond pride, teaching us that true greatness is not about standing over others, but standing with them. There is a dangerous illusion in society, the belief that some jobs are more important than others because of status, title, or paycheck. It is easy to look at a businessman in a suit and imagine his work is more significant than the worker who cleans the floors, serves the food, or carries the tools. Yet the truth is, every job has value. The businessman in our story believed his role gave him superiority, so he shouted at his worker, forgetting that his own success was built on the labor of others. But when we look deeper, we see that no system, no company, no community can survive without the unseen hands that keep it alive. Every job matters because every contribution fits into the larger picture of progress. Think of a building. The architect may design it, but without the builders, the electricians, the cleaners, the project remains a sketch on paper. Think of a hospital. A surgeon may perform the most delicate operation, but without the nurse who prepares the instruments, without the janitor who sanitizes the room, Without the technician who maintains the equipment, lives cannot be saved. Value does not come from titles. It comes from purpose, and every job carries purpose. The worker in the story may not have had wealth, but his work held dignity. He showed up each day, fulfilling his duty, ensuring that the gears of the business kept turning. His boss, in his arrogance, forgot that authority does not exist without those who support it. A leader without workers is powerless. A company without labor is empty. A society without ordinary jobs collapses. Yet, too often, people underestimate the worth of those who labor quietly, those whose names are never spoken on grand stages, but whose contributions keep the world moving. Think of the teacher in a small classroom, shaping young minds for the future. Think of the farmer who rises before dawn to grow the food that feeds families. Think of the bus driver who delivers children safely to school every day. None of these jobs make headlines, none may come with massive paychecks, but imagine a world without them. Imagine classrooms without teachers, fields without farmers, roads without drivers. Suddenly, the ordinary jobs reveal themselves as extraordinary, essential, irreplaceable. When we diminish the value of work based on income or prestige, we dishonor the very foundation of society. Wealth may sit at the top, but it is built on countless hands below. The businessman's shouting may have suggested power, but the worker's presence reminded everyone of the truth. His role mattered. He was not less important, only less recognized. The measure of a person is not the uniform they wear or the salary they earn, but the honesty, effort, and pride they bring into their work. We can see this truth in moments of crisis. During disasters, it is often the overlooked workers, the delivery drivers, the sanitation teams, the health aides, who carry the greatest burdens. They are the ones who step forward when comfort would be easier, the ones who ensure society continues to function when everything seems uncertain. And in those moments, the world realizes what should have been obvious all along: every job has value. The worker's quiet perseverance is a reflection of millions of people across the globe who wake up every day, not to applause, not to recognition, but to fulfill their duty. They are the invisible threads holding communities together. They remind us that no role is too small when it contributes to the greater good. And when respect is given to every job, no matter how humble, dignity rises and humanity thrives. The businessman believed his wealth made him bigger, but without the worker, his wealth would have no foundation. Without those who serve, there is nothing to manage. Without those who build, there is nothing to sell. Without those who sacrifice, there is nothing to lead. This is why every job, from the highest office to the humblest task, deserves respect. Every role, no matter how hidden, carries within it the power to shape lives and sustain the world. The true strength of a society is not found in the wealth of the few, but in the shared labor of the many. The true worth of a leader is not how loudly he commands, but how deeply he values the contributions of those who stand beside him. Every job has value, because every human being has value, and when we honor both, we unlock the true meaning of respect. And progress. Power is one of the greatest tests of human character. It can be a tool for building or a weapon for breaking. The story of the businessman and his worker reveals how fragile power becomes when it is misused. The businessman believed that raising his voice and humiliating another proved his dominance, but in truth it exposed the weakness of his leadership. Power, when used to crush others, does not elevate the one holding it. It diminishes them. True power is not about pressing others down, it is about lifting them higher. Consider the worker in the story. He was not wealthy, he held no title, and he carried no authority. Yet when his boss chose to shout at him, the worker's quiet dignity transformed the moment. His silence revealed that the businessman's power was hollow, because it was used not to guide or inspire, but to belittle. The worker's composure reminded everyone watching that leadership is not measured in how loudly you command, but in how responsibly you use the influence you've been given. History is filled with examples that show the difference between power that crushes and power that lifts. Leaders who rule through fear may control for a season, but they never win loyalty. Their empires collapse because no one willingly carries the weight of their vision. On the other hand, leaders who use power to lift others leave legacies that last generations. They do not see people as tools, but as partners. They do not use their voices to silence, but to encourage. Nelson Mandela, after decades in prison, chose not to crush those who had crushed him. Instead, he used his power to unite a divided nation. That is the strength of lifting power. In our daily lives, the principle is no different. A teacher holds power over students, but the best teachers are not those who intimidate. They are those who inspire curiosity and confidence. A manager holds power over employees, but the best managers are not those who control. They are those who bring out the best in their teams. A parent holds power over children, but the most loving parents are not those who demand obedience through fear. They are those who nurture growth through patience and care. Power used to lift becomes a bridge to progress, while power used to crush becomes a wall of resentment. When the businessman shouted at his worker, he may have felt victorious for a moment. But what was truly accomplished? Perhaps the worker obeyed, perhaps the room went silent, but beneath that silence grew bitterness, frustration, and mistrust. Power achieved compliance, but it destroyed connection. Imagine instead if the businessman had chosen differently. Imagine if he had used his authority to encourage, to correct with kindness, to guide with respect. That same moment could have inspired loyalty rather than fear, growth rather than resentment, unity rather than division. Power is not inherently good or bad. It is a responsibility. It magnifies the heart of the one who holds it. In the hands of the arrogant, it becomes a hammer that breaks. In the hands of the humble, it becomes a ladder that lifts. And because of this, every person who carries influence, no matter how large or small, must ask, am I using my power to lift others up, or am I using it to crush them down? The worker's dignity in the face of arrogance teaches us something vital. Even when someone misuses power against you, their behavior reflects them, not you. The businessman's shout showed his insecurity, while the worker's calmness showed his strength. But for those of us who do hold positions of influence, whether over a team, a family, or even a single person, the lesson is clear. Power that crushes may create obedience for a day, but power that lifts creates respect for a lifetime. Every society, every workplace, every community depends on how power is used. When it is used to crush, division spreads. When it is used to lift, unity grows. The businessman failed to understand this, and his mistake revealed a truth we must all remember: leadership is not proven by how many people kneel before you, but by how many people rise because of you. Greatness is often imagined as something reserved for the powerful, the wealthy, or the famous. We grow up believing that change comes only from the top, from those who hold titles and influence. Yet history and life prove again and again that extraordinary change often begins with ordinary people. Individuals who may have no wealth, no recognition, no position of authority, but who carry within them courage, perseverance, and dignity. The story of the businessman and his worker is one such reminder. The businessman believed his shouting showed strength, but in the silence and perseverance of the worker, a greater strength was revealed. That quiet defiance, that refusal to lose dignity, became the extraordinary lesson that transformed an ordinary moment into something unforgettable. Ordinary people create extraordinary change because they live closest to the struggles and realities of life. The worker did not plan to teach a lesson. He was not seeking an audience. He was simply living out his truth, that respect cannot be taken away by arrogance, and dignity cannot be stolen by noise. Yet in that simple act, he inspired everyone who witnessed it. Without realizing it, he shifted the atmosphere of the workplace, exposing arrogance for what it was and revealing that true power rests in character. History is filled with similar examples. Rosa Parks was an ordinary seamstress, not a politician, not a leader of great armies. Yet her refusal to give up her seat on a bus sparked a movement that changed the course of civil rights. Malala Yousafzai was an ordinary student, a young girl seeking education, until her bravery turned her into a global voice for millions of children. These individuals were not extraordinary because of their positions. They were extraordinary because they chose to act, because they believed in their dignity, and because they refused to accept injustice as normal. Ordinary people create extraordinary change in quieter ways too, ways that rarely make headlines but shape lives every single day. A teacher who stays after class to help a struggling child may never be recognized on a stage, but that small act could inspire a future leader. A nurse who comforts a patient in the darkest moment may never be celebrated on television, but that compassion could give someone the will to keep living. A worker who chooses integrity when no one is watching may not be applauded, but their example ripples outward, reminding others that honesty still matters. This is the essence of extraordinary change. It does not always look grand, but its impact lasts. The businessman's outburst might have silenced the room for a moment, but the worker's quiet strength continues to speak long after. That is what ordinary people do. They remind us of truths we often forget in the noise of the world. They remind us that every voice matters, every choice matters, and every act of courage, no matter how small, holds the potential to move hearts and change stories. The reason ordinary people can create extraordinary change is because they embody something universal. They represent the resilience of humanity itself. They carry the stories of families, of communities, of struggles and dreams. They remind us that change does not only come from speeches in parliaments or decisions in boardrooms, but from the persistence of those who refuse to give up. The worker in the story represents countless people around the world who endure disrespect yet continue to persevere, who are overlooked yet remain essential, who are underestimated yet carry the power to inspire transformation. We must also remember that extraordinary change is not measured only in what the world sees. It is measured in the invisible impact on lives. A smile to someone in despair, an act of forgiveness when anger would be easier, a moment of patience when frustration could have taken over. These are small choices that ripple far beyond what we can see. Ordinary people make these choices every day, and collectively, they shape the character of families, communities, and nations. The businessman believed he had all the power because he had wealth, but the worker's story shows us that extraordinary influence comes from within. The worker did not have money to command attention, but he had dignity to command respect. He did not have authority to silence others, but he had character to inspire them. And that is why ordinary people are so powerful. They remind us that greatness is not reserved for a select few. It belongs to anyone who chooses courage, integrity, and perseverance in the face of adversity. Leadership is often misunderstood as a matter of control, wealth, or titles. Too many people assume that the one who shouts the loudest, gives the orders, and displays authority is automatically a leader. But true leadership is not defined by how much authority one has. It is defined by the respect one gives and the respect one earns. Respect is the currency of true leadership, and without it, no amount of power, money, or status can sustain influence for long. The story of the businessman and his worker illustrates this truth in the most human way. The businessman, clothed in power and wealth, chose to shout at his worker. For a moment, he may have felt powerful, but in reality, he exposed the emptiness of his leadership because he failed to understand that disrespect erodes authority, while respect builds it. Respect is not something that can be demanded, it is something that must be earned. A worker may comply with orders out of necessity, but compliance is not the same as loyalty. The businessman had the power to demand obedience, but he lacked the wisdom to inspire trust. The worker, by contrast, held no authority in that room, yet his calm dignity commanded the silent respect of everyone watching. That is the paradox of leadership. Those who respect others gain influence that cannot be bought, while those who disrespect others lose influence, even when they hold official power. Consider how this principle plays out in everyday life. In families, parents who rule with harshness may enforce obedience, but they lose the hearts of their children. Parents who discipline with respect, who listen and guide with love, raise children who honor them not out of fear, but out of genuine admiration. In workplaces, managers who belittle their teams may see short-term results, but they create environments of resentment and disengagement. On the other hand, leaders who show respect, by valuing input, recognizing effort, and treating every worker with dignity, cultivate loyalty that drives long-term success. Respect builds bridges where authority alone cannot. Respect is powerful because it recognizes humanity. It acknowledges that every person, regardless of position or status, carries worth. When a leader respects a worker, it communicates that their role matters, that their contribution is valuable, that they are seen. This simple acknowledgement can spark extraordinary commitment. A worker who feels respected will go beyond their duties, not because they are forced, but because they are inspired. A citizen who feels respected by their government will participate in building society. A child who feels respected by their parents will grow with confidence to respect others. Respect creates a cycle of growth, while disrespect creates a cycle of decay. The businessman in the story may have built his company on financial strength, but he weakened it in that moment of disrespect. When leaders forget that respect is their greatest asset, they undermine their own foundation. People may follow orders because they must, but they will never give their hearts to a leader who disrespects them. In contrast, history honors those leaders who understood respect. Abraham Lincoln, leading a divided nation, once said, "I destroy my enemies when I make them my friends." He understood that respect does not mean weakness. It means strength strong enough to build rather than break. Leaders like Lincoln, Gandhi, or Mandela earned respect not through intimidation, but through their ability to respect even those who opposed them. Respect is also contagious. When a leader demonstrates it, it sets the tone for an entire culture. A respected leader fosters respect among team members, and soon it becomes the norm within that community or organization. But the opposite is true as well. Disrespect from the top creates environments filled with fear, distrust, and conflict. The businessman's disrespectful outburst was more than a personal flaw. It was a warning sign for the culture he was creating. If left unchecked, that kind of behavior spreads until an entire workplace becomes toxic. The worker's quiet dignity, however, reminds us of the enduring power of respect. Though he held no authority, his refusal to mirror the businessman's arrogance displayed strength that everyone could feel. Respect does not need wealth or titles to exist. It flows from character. And because of this, respect is available to everyone. An ordinary worker can earn respect through diligence and integrity. A student can earn respect through discipline and kindness. A parent can earn respect through pace and consistency. True leadership, whether in a home, a business, or a nation, is built on this foundation. What makes respect the true currency of leadership is that it multiplies when given away. Unlike money or power, which diminish when shared, respect grows stronger the more it is practiced. A leader who invests in respecting others gains not only trust but also influence that endures beyond position or title. The businessman shouted to feel powerful, but the worker's calmness showed where real power lies, in the respect that cannot be shaken by noise, arrogance, or pride. Power in itself is neither good nor bad. It is neutral, waiting to be shaped by the character of the one who holds it. When power is clothed in arrogance, it becomes destructive, crushing those beneath it and isolating the one who wields it. But when power is guided by humility, it transforms into influence. An influence that uplifts others, inspires loyalty, and endures long after titles and positions fade. Humility does not diminish power, it refines it, making it meaningful and lasting. The story of the businessman and his worker embodies this truth. The businessman possessed power, yet because he lacked humility, his shouting revealed weakness rather than strength. His worker, on the other hand, had no authority in worldly terms, but through quiet humility, he influenced the hearts of everyone who watched the encounter. Humility is often mistaken for weakness, but it is the opposite. It takes greater strength to bow than to boast, to listen than to shout, to admit wrong than to insist on being right. Arrogance is loud, but humility is powerful in its silence. The worker's refusal to retaliate, his choice to endure with dignity, was not an act of weakness. It was an act of strength. His humility disarmed arrogance, revealing that true influence is not forced, but earned through character. This moment became a lesson not just for the businessman, but for all who witnessed it. Humility elevates even the lowest position, while pride can bring down the highest. Throughout history, some of the most influential figures have been those who practiced humility. Mother Teresa, serving the poorest of the poor, held no political office, no economic power, yet her humility inspired millions across the globe. Nelson Mandela, after decades of imprisonment, emerged not with vengeance, but with humility and forgiveness, transforming a nation divided by hatred. Their examples show us that power alone may control, but humility transforms power into influence that changes hearts and shapes generations. Influence born of humility endures far longer than authority born of pride. In everyday life, humility plays the same role. A teacher who admits they can learn from their students creates a classroom where respect and curiosity thrive. A business leader who listens to workers at every level creates a company culture of innovation and loyalty. A parent who apologizes when wrong teaches a child that love is stronger than ego. These acts of humility do not weaken authority, they strengthen it, but because they turn authority into influence that inspires commitment rather than mere compliance. The businessman in the story could have transformed that moment into one of inspiration had he chosen humility. Imagine if instead of shouting, he paused to acknowledge the worker's effort, to understand the struggle behind a mistake, to extend respect despite frustration. That simple act would not have cost him any power, but it would have multiplied his influence, strengthening trust and loyalty in his workplace. Instead, by choosing arrogance, he weakened his own leadership. His outburst was momentary, but its effect lingered, showing everyone that his authority lacked the depth that only humility can give. Humility transforms power into influence because it bridges the gap between leader and follower. Power without humility creates distance, separating the one at the top from those below. But humility closes that distance, reminding everyone that leadership is not about being above others, but about walking with them. When people see humility in a leader, they feel connected, valued, and seen. That connection becomes the foundation of influence, and it cannot be shaken by circumstances. Moreover, humility allows growth, while arrogance stifles it. A leader who thinks they know everything refuses to learn, but a humble leader remains teachable, open to new ideas, and willing to adapt. In the story, the businessman had an opportunity to learn from the quiet dignity of his worker. If he embraced humility, he could discover that respect, kindness, and understanding are more powerful tools for leadership than shouting or intimidation. Humility turns mistakes into lessons, challenges into opportunities, and conflicts into bridges. The most profound truth about humility is that it makes power human. It reminds us that leaders and workers, rich and poor, powerful and powerless, are all bound by the same humanity. Humility acknowledges this shared humanity, and in doing so, it transforms power into something that serves rather than dominates. The worker's humility reminded the businessman, and everyone watching, that leadership without humility is empty, But leadership with humility can touch hearts and leave an impact that wealth alone never could. In every society, workplace, and family, there is a hierarchy of voices. Some speak loudly, backed by authority, wealth, or influence. Others whisper quietly, often overlooked, dismissed, or silenced because of their perceived lower status. Yet history and human experience consistently prove a powerful truth: every voice matters, no matter how small. The story of the businessman shouting at his worker is not only about arrogance and respect. It is also a lesson in how the quietest voices can carry the deepest wisdom. The worker may not have been the one in charge, but his calm response spoke louder than the businessman's anger, reminding everyone present that true power lies not in volume, but in the value of one's words and actions. It is easy to dismiss a voice that comes from someone society calls ordinary. Workers, children, the poor, or the marginalized are too often told their voices carry little weight. Yet the greatest revolutions, the most profound changes, often begin with those underestimated voices. Think of Rosa Parks, a seamstress whose quiet act of refusing to give up her seat sparked a movement that changed the course of history. Think of Malala Yousafzai, a young girl who insisted on the right to education and shook the conscience of the world. These individuals were not powerful in the conventional sense, yet their voices became catalysts for transformation because they were rooted in truth, courage, and conviction. The businessman in the story believed his voice mattered more because it was louder, harsher, and backed by wealth. But influence is not measured by volume or titles. It is measured by impact. His workers' silence, his refusal to fight back with anger, became the voice that resonated with all who witnessed the encounter. That moment illustrates how even in the smallest interactions, the voices we least expect can teach us the greatest lessons. A leader who ignores those voices fails to realize that wisdom often comes from unexpected places. Every voice matters because every person carries experience, perspective, and dignity. In a workplace, the insights of a janitor can be as valuable as those of a CEO because the janitor sees details the executive may overlook. In a family, the thoughts of a child can hold surprising truth because children often see the world with clarity adults lose. In society, the cry of the oppressed often speaks the truths the powerful would rather ignore, truths that eventually reshape laws, values, and futures. To ignore these voices is not only unjust but unwise, because in silencing them, we lose the very wisdom that could move us forward. The worker's voice in this story was not raised in anger, but it spoke through action, through the dignity of self-control. That, too, is a reminder that voices are not only words, they are expressed through character, through choices, through quiet acts of resilience. A single act of patience in the face of disrespect can speak volumes to those watching. A single act of courage in the face of oppression can ignite a movement. Voices matter not only when they are heard, but when they are lived out in action. Leaders who understand that every voice matters create environments where creativity flourishes and trust thrives. When people feel their voices count, they contribute more fully, knowing they are valued. A team where only the loudest voices are heard quickly becomes stagnant, while a team where even the softest voice is respected becomes dynamic and innovative. The businessman could have learned more about leadership by listening to the quiet strength of his worker than by enforcing his dominance. But arrogance blinds us, while humility opens our ears to the wisdom hidden in small voices. Even in broader society, change begins when the smallest voices unite. A single protest may be ignored, but when voices gather together, they become impossible to silence. The worker's calm presence may have seemed small at that moment, but it carried a ripple effect, teaching everyone who saw it about dignity, restraint, and humanity. That is the hidden power of voices. They carry further than we realize, influencing others in ways we cannot immediately see. To say every voice matters is not just a poetic idea, it is a practical truth. A company that ignores its workers collapses from within. A government that silences its people faces inevitable unrest. A family that dismisses its children's struggles to build trust. Respecting every voice, no matter how small, is not merely kindness. It is wisdom, because the smallest voices often contain the truths we most need to hear. The worker's voice in the story may not have been loud, but it carried the weight of a lesson that outlasted the businessman's shout, showing us that when we recognize the worth of every voice, we uncover the strength of humanity itself. Leadership has long been measured by titles, wealth, or authority, but none of these truly sustain a leader's influence. At the core of lasting leadership lies one essential currency: respect. Unlike money, which can be spent and lost, or power, which can be seized and taken away, respect is earned through consistent action, humility, and integrity. It cannot be demanded or shouted into existence. It grows quietly in the hearts of those who witness how a leader treats others, especially those who stand in positions of lesser power. The story of the businessman and his worker reveals this principle clearly. Shouting may command temporary silence, but only respect can create lasting loyalty. Respect is not about agreeing with everyone or avoiding hard decisions. It is about recognizing the inherent dignity of every individual, no matter their role or status. A true leader understands that people will forget the words of a speech or the specifics of a decision, but they will never forget how they were treated. When the businessman chose to shout, he may have gained compliance at that moment, but he lost something far more valuable: the respect of his worker and the silent observers who witnessed the exchange. Respect cannot coexist with humiliation, because once dignity is stripped away, trust begins to erode, and without trust, leadership collapses. In any environment, whether it is a company, a community, or a family, respect creates the foundation on which everything else stands. Employees who feel respected give more of themselves to their work, not because they fear punishment, but because they feel valued. Citizens who feel respected by their leaders engage more deeply in building society, not out of obligation, but out of pride. Children who feel respected by their parents grow into adults who carry confidence and empathy into the world. Respect is the fuel that turns leadership from mere authority into genuine influence, and without it, authority becomes hollow. Consider the opposite: environments built on fear rather than respect. Workers may follow orders, but they do so half-heartedly, always ready to leave at the first chance. People may obey laws, but they do so resentfully, seeking ways to resist silently. Families may appear united, but underneath lies resentment and distance. Fear may secure short-term control, but it cannot win hearts. Respect, however, creates a sense of belonging, loyalty, and trust that endures through challenges and disagreements. This is why respect is the true currency. It cannot be bought with money or enforced through power. It must be earned and invested consistently. The worker in the story showed us that respect is also a two-way street. He did not retaliate or lower himself to the level of the businessman's anger. In choosing dignity, he demonstrated self-respect, and that in turn inspired respect from others. Leadership is not only about giving respect, but also about modeling it. People mirror what they see. When a leader shows respect, others follow. When a leader shows arrogance, that too spreads like wildfire. The businessman may have had wealth and position, but his worker left a more powerful imprint in that moment, reminding everyone present that leadership without respect is fragile and unsustainable. Throughout history, the leaders who have stood the test of time are those who treated even the lowest, ranked individuals with respect. Abraham Lincoln, often remembered as one of the greatest leaders, was known for greeting everyone, from generals to janitors, with equal courtesy. Mahatma Gandhi led not through force, but through respect for even his adversaries, a respect so profound that it inspired millions to follow him without weapons or armies. These examples remind us that respect, more than authority, is what defines greatness in leadership. Respect also opens the door to listening, and listening is one of the most powerful tools of leadership. When leaders respect the voices of their people, they create cultures of innovation, resilience, and cooperation. The businessman missed a crucial opportunity by silencing his worker with anger instead of listening to what might have been a valuable perspective. Leaders who listen communicate respect, and in return, they earn the trust that sustains their leadership even in times of crisis. At its core, respect is the acknowledgement of shared humanity. It is the recognition that no matter how different our roles, we are equal in dignity. A CEO without workers has no company. A ruler without citizens has no kingdom. A teacher without students has no classroom. Respect binds these relationships together, reminding us that leadership is not about standing above others, but about standing with them. Without respect, authority becomes brittle. With respect, it becomes unshakable. Respect is the currency of true leadership because it transcends power, wealth, and status. The businessman's shout may have echoed in that room for a moment, but the worker's quiet dignity resonated much longer, teaching everyone a simple truth. People will follow rules, but they will only give their hearts to a leader who gives them respect. In a world often divided by status, wealth, and position, one of the greatest lessons we can embrace is the truth that every voice carries value. It does not matter whether a person is a leader in a grand office or a worker sweeping the floors at dawn. Each voice holds the power to teach, to challenge, and to inspire. When voices are silenced, potential is lost. When voices are honored, entire communities thrive. The story of the businessman and his worker highlights this truth with clarity. The businessman shouted, attempting to drown out the worker's voice, but in that moment of arrogance, he silenced more than just words. He silenced the opportunity to learn, to connect, and to grow. Every voice matters because each carries a unique perspective shaped by experience. A worker who labors daily knows struggles and insights that the businessman behind a desk may never see. A child's innocent question can unlock a truth that adults overlook in their complexity. A marginalized community, long ignored, often carries the wisdom of resilience that privileged groups cannot imagine. When leaders ignore or dismiss these voices, they weaken not only the people but themselves, for they cut themselves off from the richness of wisdom that only diverse perspectives can provide. True leadership listens. Listening is not passive. It is an act of respect, a declaration that someone's voice has weight and meaning. When a leader chooses to listen, they invite trust. When they silence others, they breed resentment. The businessman had authority, but by choosing to shout instead of listen, he lost influence. His worker may not have spoken loudly, but his silent dignity became a voice louder than the businessman's anger. It reminded everyone present that the strength of a voice is not in its volume, but in the truth it carries. History provides countless reminders of what happens when voices are ignored, and what happens when they are heard. The civil rights movement in America was built on voices long silenced, finally demanding to be acknowledged. Women's rights were advanced because women refused to remain quiet and insisted their voices be heard. Nations have been reshaped, injustices overturned, and societies transformed not by the shouts of the powerful, but by the steady insistence of those who once had no platform. When ordinary voices unite, they become extraordinary forces of change. In the workplace, the principle is just as true. A company that listens to the voices of its employees creates an environment of innovation and loyalty. Workers on the ground often see problems and solutions long before executives do. By listening, leaders not only empower their people, but also strengthen their own vision. In families, listening to children teaches them that they are valued, building confidence that lasts a lifetime. In communities, listening to every member creates unity, where people feel they belong because their voices matter. Wherever respect for voices thrives, trust, progress, and hope follow. Silencing voices, on the other hand, creates wounds. When someone is told their perspective does not matter, they begin to withdraw, to hold back their creativity, their ideas, and their energy. Over time, silence becomes not a choice but a burden. The businessman's shout could have left his worker carrying such a wound. A message that his contributions were invisible. And yet, the worker's quiet response flipped the lesson. Even in silence, a voice can be heard if it carries dignity. His restraint became a statement louder than any words could have been, teaching that silence itself can be a voice of strength when it refuses to be diminished. Every voice deserves to be heard, not because every voice is perfect, but because every voice is human. Even when we disagree, listening affirms dignity. Even when we cannot act on every suggestion, listening builds trust. Leadership is not about having all the answers, but about creating a space where voices can contribute to the answers together. When leaders cultivate this environment, they build communities that are stronger, workplaces that are more creative, and nations that are more just. The businessman in the story missed an opportunity to embody this truth. His worker's voice, though quiet, carried lessons of patience, resilience, and dignity, lessons that no wealth or authority could buy. If he had chosen to hear instead of shout, he might have discovered that leadership grows not from silencing, but from listening. The story reminds us all that the greatest leaders are not those who speak the loudest, but those who make room for every voice at the table. And when every voice is heard, even the smallest among us can help shape a future greater than we imagined. In the end, the story of the businessman who shouted at his worker is not just about one moment of anger. It is a mirror held up to each of us. It reminds us that leadership is not measured by titles, wealth, or the volume of our voice, but by the respect we show, the dignity we uphold, and the willingness to listen. The worker, through his quiet strength, proved that true power is not in domination but in composure, not in humiliation but in humanity. This is the lesson for our workplaces, our families, and our communities. Respect must be the foundation, and every voice must be honored. We cannot build lasting success by silencing others. We can only rise by lifting each other. The world does not need more leaders who shout. It needs leaders who listen. So let us leave with this truth in our hearts. Perseverance is built through challenges. Change is born from courage. And belief in a better future is sustained when we see the dignity in every person. You have the power to embody this lesson in your own life. You have the chance to choose respect over arrogance, empathy over anger, and listening over shouting. Because in the end, greatness is not what you demand from others. It is what you inspire in them. And when respect becomes our language, unity becomes our reality, and together, we can create a future where every person matters, every story has value, and every voice is finally heard.